Hello again everybody, today I'm back, and as you can tell probably from the date, you can probably guess I'm going to be back today with my wrap-up for the month of April and my TBR for the month of May. So as you'll see when I get into it, I didn't have the most productive reading month in April, and I did kind of set myself quite big targets. It was my birthday and I went away for a little bit, and it just meant that I didn't have as much time to read as I normally do, which is disappointing. But as you'll see, I'll explain why that is, and we'll go over what I'm reading for the next month as well. So we're going to get straight down into the books I did actually read in the month of April. Now, there's 8 of them altogether, so that's still pretty good going, and it's a good mixture of genres, but we'll straight away get started with SPQR by Mary Beard. So I've literally just uploaded a 60-second review for this, which I'll link down below. But basically this is a really comprehensive history of Rome and the Roman Empire, from its very inception right the way through to about 200 AD. It's really interestingly written. It's really good that it goes straight from the kind of really big grand events like Caesar's assassination or expansions and conflict with Cleopatra in Egypt, right down to really small little things about a particular aristocrat who had to move to a different part of the empire for this reason. Really like personal stuff that you don't often get in the kind of histories of Rome. It's kind of the big epic world-changing events that get all the coverage, but it's really good to have that kind of interaction between the two different types of history. Mary Beard, for anyone that's seen any TV shows or read any of her books, is such a good writer. She's really conversational but full and really gets loads of detail across. She's just started a TV show to go with this as well, and I can't wait to watch that. But she's just very funny, and even though it is 450 pages worth of quite detailed historical research, it's so easy to read. It almost reads like fiction. I have to say, I studied ancient history at university, so it's kind of a little bit up my alleyway anyway. But I think that it's genuinely one of the best history books I've read, in how readable it is and how much detail it's got in it. And I think anyone with a passing interest in history, or anyone that is really into history and really just wants to screw up even more, this is a really good book to read, and I know you'll enjoy it as well. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Second up is Lost Japan by Alex Kerr. So I've talked about this a few times on here. Basically, Japan is one of those places I just really want to go to. I think it's a fascinating culture, and I think it's a beautiful country, and a few of my friends have just got back, and it's killing me that I haven't been yet. But this book, as you can see from the cover, is just a little bit beautiful. It was originally written in the 90s by this guy, Alex Kerr, who basically has lived in Japan all his life. He lived there with his parents when he was younger, and then moved there while he was at uni and bought a couple of houses, etc. And it's just about him and his experiences with Japan, how it's changing over time, the rural versus urban divide in Japan, and it's just fascinating to see those kind of internal, personalised looks at Japan that you don't necessarily get. It's very dominated by things like the big lights of Tokyo and some of the weirder cultures they've got. But this covers things like tea ceremony and kabuki theatre that you just don't get to cover or read about much, and it really makes me want to go to Japan. It is a bit disappointing that it's not a particularly gripping read. It is a little bit out of date now, but that's interesting at the same time, comparing that to now. But it just never really gripped me. I enjoyed it and I think it's fascinating, but I never wanted to pick the book up again and carry on reading. So just on that point alone, I've had to give this a 6.5 out of 10. So next up is a book I've actually been reading for a few months already, and that's Power by Robert Greene. So I've talked about this in the past, that it's kind of a mixture between a self-help book and a history book, and it lists these laws of power, which are things that you need to do, or laws you should follow if you want to achieve success. And it then goes into some really interesting historical anecdotes about people who did and didn't follow the law and how that worked out. I went and approached this book in the wrong way, and I decided I was going to read it cover to cover and just read it like a normal book. Whereas actually, the way it's broken down is quite anecdotal, and it's not conducive to reading it in that format, and it really ruined it a little bit for me that I tried to do it that way. The past 2 months though, I've really slowed it down and read it over much more scattered events, and really enjoyed it. I think it's a really interesting way of doing it. The anecdotes are amazing. I could just read a whole other book of the anecdotes. They're just so clever and they really link well. How much practical impact it'll have? Probably not much, but in terms of the enjoyability of reading it and the anecdotes that presented, I think it's really good. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Moving on to the fiction then, I've got a really good variety of fiction writing I've read this month. First up is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. So I've mentioned that I'm reading this as part of a buddy read, organised through Goodreads, and we picked this because it's one we both wanted to read, and it's something quite interesting to discuss as well. I know, without giving too much away, obviously it's very influenced by Plath's life herself and the tragic story there, and me and the person I was reading it with both kind of had that in our heads going into it, And it's a really fascinating read to look at it through that perspective. I think it's really interesting to see how Plath puts herself into the book. It's almost autobiographical in a lot of it, and it's beautifully written, absolutely wonderfully written, really well crafted. It's a really, really sensible but really groundbreaking novel. It covers a lot of mental health problems, mainly depression and isolation, that you don't get covered, and especially at the time wasn't covered at all. And it's fascinating to see that. Really gets into the head of the character well, and a really good perspective, as you'd expect, and the author going through that herself. But basically, I really enjoyed it. And when I finished it, I decided I couldn't think of anything wrong with it, so I gave it on Goodreads 5 stars out of 5. Sitting back though, I don't think it's a 5 out of 5 book. I can't tell you why I don't want to give it a really, really high score. I think it's really well done, really well written, and really interesting. I wasn't that caught up in it. I didn't get that enraptured in it that I have with a lot of other books, especially books that cover this kind of subject matter. I can quite often get really caught up in it. Whereas this, I enjoyed it, I thought it was really well done, and I can appreciate why it's a modern classic. But for me, it really didn't hit all the boxes as much as I'd hoped. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Next up, another modern classic, even more recent this time, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time by Mark Haddon. So I bought this in a second-hand bookshop about a year ago now, that's scary. But basically, I always thought I'd read this book, and that I was going to buy it again and reread it. Actually, having read it, I've realised I definitely haven't read it in the past. I've read maybe the first 3 chapters and that's about it. But obviously everyone really has some understanding of this book. It's about the main character has got some kind of autistic spectrum disorder, and it's about him. He discovers that his neighbour's dog's being killed, and it's him trying to work out who killed his dog and work out what happened to his mum and dad's relationship and why they broke up. Now his mum is dead. So it's a really interesting book, and the perspective it's from is just incredible. How Mark Haddon gets into the head of an autistic child so well, I have no idea. It feels so real. It's something I've got quite a lot of experience with myself, and I think it's just fascinating how well Mark Haddon captures it. And because of the whole perspective of the novel, it can be quite frustrating at times, because you can see what's coming, and you completely appreciate how the character's getting there, but it's so frustrating that you can't do anything about it. I almost wanted to shout at the book numerous times, just to be like, no, don't do that, that's the wrong thing to do. But all in all, I just think it's a really, really well-written book, really well crafted, tells a really good story, and it's incredible how well Mark Haddon portrays it. I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. The last one is completely different. It's called What Belongs to You by Garth Greenwell. So what's really interesting about this book is it's very, very literary fiction, which is not my cup of tea in the slightest. Basically, it's about an American guy who moves to Bulgaria and has an encounter with another guy in a public toilet and becomes a little bit infatuated with this guy. And it's just about their relationship and the guy himself and what he's doing through his life, but it covers a whole host of things that you wouldn't necessarily expect it to cover. It deals a lot with the main character's family, but it's so well written. It's very, very literary, which, like I say, isn't my cup of tea, but I actually really enjoyed it in this case. The writing's really good, it's really well constructed, and it's a really intelligently paced piece of fiction. It is quite a bleak book, it's very dark, there's not much optimism in it. The end gets a little bit better on that front, but it isn't an uplifting book. It's quite honest, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's really good. I think anyone with even a passing interest in either LGBT literature or just in really well-written literary fiction, definitely give this a read, because it's a really good one. I gave this an 8 out of 10. Now moving on to a couple of children's and teenage books. The first one is Concentrate by William Sutcliffe. So this is another one I picked up in a second-hand bookshop, and this one is all about ADHD. Whether it exists, whether it doesn't exist, but essentially in this, there's a drug created called Concentrate, which head teachers are able to allocate to particular children in their schools that they think have got behavioural problems. Whether that is medical or whether it's just because they're a bit of a nightmare. And it's a really interesting discussion of how that works. It gets to a point in the book, which is in the first 20 pages or so, where the government can't afford to fund the Concentrate programme anymore, and it's all withdrawn, and riots erupt, and the group of main characters basically kidnap just an average person that works for the council to make their point about Concentrate being taken away. But it's really interesting because it delves into quite a lot of interesting questions about whether ADHD exists, whether behavioural problems should be controlled medically, or what the line is between it, what extent parents will go to. Just a really interesting political book, which actually you don't get many of those aimed at YA audiences, so it's great on that front. I wasn't massively gripped by any of the characters, or particularly by the story aside from the general concept. It definitely gets better as it goes on, and there's some really good political satire. There is a character in here who I am almost entirely certain is Boris Johnson, but basically it's just a really cleverly constructed, interesting little YA book. I'd have never picked it up otherwise, but I really enjoyed it. I gave this a 7 out of 10. The last book then is one I am so excited about. The Girl of Incan Stars by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. So, as you can see from the cover, this is an amazing, beautiful little book. It gets better when you flip inside, and all the page edges are decorated with these beautiful little annotations and these lovely little diagrams, and it's just incredible. Basically, it's kind of, I'd be thinking of it as halfway between Enid Blyton's kind of famous 5 books and halfway between Philip Pullman's Northern Lights style. It's that kind of vaguely magical bit Narnia. It's just about adventure and friendship, and the main character's a cartographer's daughter, and they're living as part of this really decrepit dictatorial regime, and her best friend is the dictator's daughter. The dictator's daughter goes missing, her dad gets arrested, and she has to go pretend to be somebody she isn't and go on this expedition to find a friend. And it goes into some really strange, magical, mythical elements, but it's just so well done. It's a beautiful book. It's the exact kind of thing I'd have loved when I was younger, and I absolutely loved it now. The pacing doesn't get quite as good towards the end. It kind of accelerates really fast, and a lot of things don't get introduced in the best way. But all in all, really enjoyed it. The characters are great, the concept is beautiful, the packaging's amazing, and anyone with even a passing interest in kind of goth, Nixie, Philip Pullman style literature, give this a read. I gave it 9 out of 10. So there you have it, they're the books I read over the course of April. Really good selection, but now I'm going to show you the books I'm going to get down to reading in May. So first up, these 5 are ones I was meant to read in the month of April and didn't. I don't know why I thought 13 books was a good idea, but basically I'm not going to talk about these ones too much again, because I've already spoken about them last month. I'll link down below if you want to read more about them. But basically there's a couple of fantasy books, a non-fiction book about video games and the practical applications for life, a book about disappearing religions in the Middle East, and a book about video game music and the best video game soundtracks over time. So it's a very diverse mixture. But like I say, if you want more info on any of them, I talked about them all last month, and I'll link them down below in the description. Next up then are the new books I'm reading for the month of May. So first up is Europe In or Out, which anyone in the UK, you'll get exactly where this is going. Basically, we've got a referendum in the UK in June about whether we should stay in the European Union or whether we should leave and just be a completely separate entity. And it's a big debate. It's taken over basically all the media and all the discussion in the UK at the minute. And I'm pretty sure I know what I'm going to vote for, but I do want to make sure that I've got quite a rounded understanding of the situation beforehand. And this book has been billed as one of the most impartial and just generally spells out what the differences are, what the two parts mean, and kind of what choice the actual choice is. I don't know how impartial that actually is. I'm intrigued to see what it's like, but I thought I'd scrub up just beforehand. I think being informed for this kind of thing is always the best way of doing it, so I really want to give that a go this time. The next two kind of pair up quite well. So the first is The Loney by Andrew Michael Hurley. So this is a kind of gothic-y fiction book. I literally don't know much about the plot, but the cover has always gripped me. And it's won quite a few awards. It won the Costa Award for Best Debut. And it's been very much heralded as almost like a modern-day Bronte. It's that kind of murky, twisty, moody gothic novel. It seems to be about some kind of familial dispute on the northeast coast of England, and it just looks like it's going to be right up my street. Linking with that then is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So I've talked about this a few times on here as being one of my favourite books, if not my favourite. It's a close call between this and Being Mortal. But I've not read it since I studied it for GCSE properly, so this beautiful new edition came out, I had to get it. I cannot wait to read it. Anyone that's not read any Bronte, and especially Wuthering Heights, really needs to give it a read. It's so unlike anything else I've read. Even in terms of classics, there's nothing else quite like it. It's got more bite than Jane Austen. It's just really dark and twisty and really gothic, and the character relationships are incredible. So definitely anyone give that a read. I can't wait to give that a read again. The last book is very much up my street again. The Last Act of Love by Cathy Retzenbrink. So this kind of ties into my love for books like Being Mortal and Do No Harm, and that it's a really interesting look at grief and dealing with coming to the end of life and how you cope with that afterwards. The author, Cathy Retzenbrink, her brother basically got diagnosed with terminal illness, and it's about them dealing with that and working through it. And it sounds fascinating. Cathy Retzenbrink has got such good accolades for how good her writing is, her style, and having read things like When Breath Becomes Air, where the writing of it is a really key part of why the book hits so hard. I'm really excited to see how this does that as well, and I can't wait to give it a read given that it's so similar to those other ones I've loved in the past. There we have it. That's my wrap-up and TBR for April and May. It's a really good selection of books. Hopefully I'll actually be able to read them all this month, and I can't wait to get started on it already. As always, a like and subscribe is really appreciated, and any recommendations for what to read next month is always appreciated. I'm going to do another big stock up towards the end of the month because I am running quite low on books again, so any suggestions you've got would be really appreciated. Other than that, I'll link reviews and things for all the books from today that I've already reviewed on the channel down below, and I'll link last month so you can read up on any of the books you missed. And other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with my next video.